Alrighty, party peoples of the interwebs, did you know that the man who tried to assassinate Donald John Trump on his golf course had his trial, was convicted on all counts, and then proceeded to try to stab himself in the neck with a pen? I bet you didn't know that. Viva Fry, former Montreal litigator turned current Florida rumbler in my home office, and I'm going to ask before I even get started on this vlog, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. YouTube is something of an asshole, as we say in the industry, and they are not even recommending my own videos to my own subscribers, but the solution to that is Rumble. The solution to that is vivabarneslaw.locals.com. And now, to the vlog. Why didn't you hear this news, you might be asking, or those of you who did hear it, you might live on the internet. I live on the internet. I barely heard this news, and the question is, why?
Oh, hey, can I get some of that pie and Cool Whip?
What did you say?
We can't have pie without Cool Whip.
That's not how you're supposed to say it! You said it weird!
Ryan Routh, the man who tried to assassinate Donald John Trump for the second or third time, depending on how you're counting. This was after the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt that led to the murder of Corey Comparatori. This man, Ryan Routh, with ties to Ukraine, recruiting Afghan soldiers to fight the Russians in Ukraine. A man who had been previously convicted on possession of a weapon of mass destruction. I kid you not, he was in possession of a firearm with the serial number removed from it. He had multiple phones in his car, multiple license plates in the car that he was using when he was staking out the golf course, sitting up there on the fifth hole, perched in something of a sniper's den with a ceramic plate as protection. Yeah, that man had his trial, was convicted on all counts, and then proceeded to try to stab himself in the neck in the courtroom. Now, there is no video of any of this, or if there is, it's not publicly available because this was a federal trial in the state of Florida and it was not publicly broadcast or publicly live streamed. So you gotta rely on those courtroom drawings, which look like something out of a 1970s magazine. Anyhow, this is what the New York Post is reporting as relates to the trial. Ryan Routh tries to stab himself with pen after being convicted of Trump assassination attempt by Priscilla DeGregory, published September 23rd, 2025, updated September 23rd, 2025, 4:40 p.m. Ryan Routh, the madman who holed up in a sniper's nest with an assault rifle at one of President Trump's golf courses, tried to stab himself with a pen in a Florida courtroom Tuesday after he was convicted of attempting to assassinate the then GOP nominee. A dramatic scene unfolded as jurors were leaving the courtroom when Routh took a pen and started trying to stab himself in the neck. Courtroom marshals sprang into action and dragged him out of the courtroom as his daughter, Sarah Routh, screamed at her father, quote, "Dad, I love you. Don't do anything. I'll get you out. He didn't hurt anybody," end quote, the daughter yelled. And here you have the courtroom drawing of what transpired. There is no good reason for any courtroom to not be live broadcasting these trials so that the people can see what an insane lunatic Ryan Routh was by all accounts, so they could see the trial unfolding in real time. They're open to the public as a general rule, but that means being there in person. There's zero reason why these trials should not be broadcast live streamed on the internet so that everybody can watch in real time, and so the aggregate knowledge of the interwebs can actually come together and possibly be of some assistance. Or at the very least, so that in cases of judicial corruption, that corruption can be exposed to the world. I'm not suggesting there's any corruption in this particular case. Judge Aileen Cannon, who has been handling this case, is one of the bestest judges out there. But in other cases that were in fact broadcast to the world, like the Fannie Willis situation with her boyfriend there, and the Alex Jones case in Texas, when you get to see what a bunch of corrupt hacks some of these judges are, my goodness, it's good for the public, but it's not necessarily good for the administration of justice when people start losing faith in the administration of justice. That being said, when it comes to Ryan Routh's trial, it went under the radar by all accounts. It had been going on for a few weeks, and my issue with this trial is not what it revealed. Ryan Routh was dead to rights in terms of his assassination attempt. I would have liked to have seen fleshed out his connections to groups in Ukraine, how he was able to travel to and from Ukraine with the list of felonies that he was convicted of, how he was able to procure a firearm. It seems to me that this man might have been tied to intelligence, but then the other part of me says, if this man was tied to intelligence of the previous administration, why would the Trump administration not want to put that on blast? Anyhow, who knows? Let's get back to the trial, the conviction, and him trying to stab himself in the neck after the conviction. A few minutes later, Routh was brought back into the courtroom with shackles on. He wasn't wearing the jacket and tie from earlier, and his white shirt didn't show signs of blood. The judge set his sentencing date for December 18, when he will face up to life in prison. The jurors took about 2 hours to find Routh, 59, guilty of 5 federal charges of attempted assassination, assault on a federal officer, and gun crimes following a 2-week trial in Fort Pierce, Florida. After the verdict was read out, Routh took a pen and stabbed himself in the neck. The extent of his injuries was not immediately clear. Now, in a prior vlog, I fleshed out Routh's connection connections to Ukraine, whether or not any Ukrainian groups wanted to have anything to do with him. They took to social media to disavow any connection that they might have actually had with Ryan Routh after the failed assassination attempt, and understandably so. But how this man was not only on the radar, posting on social media, giving interviews about his activities in Ukraine, trying to recruit Afghan soldiers to go fight the Russians. Nothing to see here, folks. Let's just proceed with a quick trial, a quick conviction, and then the man trying to take his own life with a ballpoint pen. Trump, in a post on Truth Social later Tuesday, thanked the judge and the jury for their, quote, professionalism and patience, end quote, and thanked the Secret Service agent who stopped Routh for his, quote, instinct and foresight, end quote. Quote, this was an evil man with an evil intention and they caught him, end quote, the post read. Quote, a very big moment for justice in America, end quote. In the context of this trial, Ryan Routh was representing himself, and I suspect it's because he wasn't cooperating with any public defender, and as they say, a man who represents himself has a fool for a client. He went on to represent himself in a batshit crazy manner, as you will see later on from what is reported in this article, but let's just refresh our memories with what the man looked like the moment after his arrest. And here you have a photo of him after the arrest, looking a little bit like Gary Busey, and I presume his shirt is up over his nipples to show that he was not carrying a weapon on his waistband. A man who represents himself has a fool for a client, and when that man also seems to be batshit crazy, he's got a batshit crazy fool for a client. Wait until you hear what Ryan Routh suggested should be the process of justice and punishment. Routh, a construction worker with no formal legal training, represented himself, putting on an amateur and bizarre defense in which he suggested the case should be settled by a golf match to the death. He suggested that he and Trump face off on the green, and if Trump won, the president could execute Routh. If Routh won, he proposed he would become president. Needless to say, these antics didn't go over very well with Judge Aileen Cannon, who you might recall was the judge in the Florida documents case that reprimanded Jack Smith for his arguably but not arguably criminal conduct in carrying out that case. Set that aside, she wasn't having any of it. She reprimanded him, yada yada yada. Let's hear a little bit about the evidence that was adduced by the prosecution and what went down in his defense. Judge Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee, stopped Routh's opening statements after less than 10 minutes following his rambling comments that touched on topics including prehistoric human history and world leaders including Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Quote, this case means absolutely nothing, end quote. Routh told jurors at one point, quote, a life has been lived to the fullest, end quote. He also tried to ask prospective panelists during jury selection about their stance on the U.S. taking over Greenland, pro-Palestinian student activism, and how they would react if a turtle crossed the road while they were driving, but Cannon blocked the questions, calling them, quote, irrelevant, end quote. Apparently, Routh came to be representing himself because he had fired his previous attorneys, and Judge Aileen Cannon allowed him to fire his public defenders, I guess, and represent himself, although she warned him that they would do a better job than he was doing. But this case was a case of dead to rights. I think the only thing other attorneys could have done better than Routh was negotiated a punishment. We'll see what the punishment is, but this was a case in which he was dead to rights to begin with, so why not make a mockery of the process while defending yourself? Since taking over, Routh has filed a slew of bonkers legal papers, including a witness list in which he sought to call the commander-in-chief himself, activist Mahmoud Khalil, and a Secret Service agent he claimed asked him to, quote, spank, slap ass, end quote.
Slap like, say slap, and subscribe. Do it now.
Is it possible that Ryan Routh actually follows Davey504 on YouTube? Slap a debase? I don't know, but I'm getting a little bit suspicious, Davey. Most of Routh's 24 proposed witnesses were barred by Cannon from testifying at trial on the grounds they couldn't offer relevant testimony. At trial, prosecutors called 38 law enforcement witnesses, including the Secret Service agent who foiled his plot, while Routh called just 3, 2 character witnesses and 1 gun expert. Routh, who pleaded not guilty to all charges, chose not to testify. In earlier court filings, Routh asked why his case wasn't death penalty eligible and asked to be traded in a prisoner exchange with Hamas, Iran, China, and Russia. He also challenged Trump to a game of golf to the death, proposing that if he lost, he should be executed, and if Trump lost, Routh should get his job. Sentencing is coming up in December, and you've heard me say it before in the context of the P. Diddy case and in the context of other cases. Sometimes the prosecution is the cover-up. I have a great many questions as to how this man got the firearm that he got, where he got it from, how he was traveling not just across the country, because domestically, I guess there's not much you can do to prevent a felon from flying, but how he was going to Ukraine, giving interviews about recruiting soldiers for the Ukrainians to fight the Russians, ostensibly partnering up with Ukrainian entities only to be disavowed after he was busted for this. Is there something of a Ukrainian tie to this? I'd like to know. None of it came out during this trial, and I can appreciate the argument. It would be sort of irrelevant to the issues at trial, and I don't know why Trump would want to cover up any ties that this man had to intelligence under the Biden administration. I don't know, but I'm a little suspicious of the way this went down, how this trial happened so quickly, so under the radar. Now he's convicted. Everything is wrapped up in a nice, neat little bow. No more questions. This man goes to jail for the rest of his life, and we move on with the next news cycle. That's it. To be continued when this man is sentenced to life in prison, because he will be sentenced to life in prison. He might not survive very long in prison if he's trying to take his own life with a pen in the courtroom. We shall see, but that's the update. If you like what I do, you know what to do, but most importantly, exercise, eat healthy sunlight, talk to people in real life, and now you know your vlog. Peace out, beeps. Booyah!